Hey everyone, it is Stephanie Martin here, and welcome to the Surrendered Life Show. Today I have a guest. Her name is Helen Elizabeth Peters, and she has a ministry called Your Best New Self. And we hit it off. We are both part of the Purpose Point organization, and we hit it off really well because a lot of our work is very, very similar. Here's some of the things that she helps women to overcome. She helps women release the weight of unmet expectations and reclaim a joyful heart. I'm reading off my phone. Reject thoughts of comparison and rejoice in living content. Break the chains of regret and live freely in loving acceptance. Face the fear of change with fearless, unchanging faith, and live undefined by a broken lineage and embrace adoption through Christ. We have a lot in common. I had a lot of fun with this interview, and without any further delay, meet Helen.
Hello, welcome to the show. I have Helen Elizabeth Peters here, and I am really excited to have her on the Surrendered Life Show today. So Helen, why don't you tell us about you and your ministry?
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, I'm Helen Elizabeth, and basically I have a ministry called Your Best New Self. And so that encompasses social media. I do a lot on social media with that, but then also a podcast and a blog, and I have a book coming out later in the fall. So it's a lot of moving parts, but I basically just try to help people become their best selves in Christ, and then also release their expectations to embrace God's plan.
Yes, and I love that. We were chatting a bit before we hit record about the importance of letting go of expectations and how significantly your life will change and does change when you let go. And as I was saying, that whole concept is the flow versus force that I talk about. You know, flowing is releasing expectations,
Yes.
moving surrendered. And then force is that trying to do it all in your own strength, make it happen according to what you want, and attaching yourself to certain outcomes and expectations. And it's quite a miserable way to live. I know, because I lived like that for a very long time. Was there a time that you lived like that, and what made things turn around for you?
Yes, I lived like that for probably, every now and then I slid back into it. But for a solid year, when I got kind of thrown into this whole ministry thing, I lived for about a year and a half just fearful of it. And so because I had this expectation I had placed on myself, or that I had imagined that other people had placed on me, even though they hadn't put anything on me, no one had any expectation. I came up with this expectation. And so then all of a sudden I lived in fear. It kept me in the same spot for months. And so 1 month would turn into 2 months. And then I'd say, okay, well, I'll get it together. I'll figure out, I'll do another, I'll learn some more. I'll research some more. I'll figure out what I'm supposed to do, how to do it correctly. And I had this picture and expectation of what was the correct way. What's the right way to post? What's the right way to dress whenever I'm doing a blog? What's the right way to do this? And I all of a sudden let all of these things make me so fearful that I just dug myself a hole and just sat there. Instead of releasing that and saying, okay, God, you've called me to this. You've said, I'm placing this in your lap. I'm placing this in front of you. I need you to now move within that lane and go forward. Whether or not you know what's going to happen, whether or not you know how to do it, I just need you to trust me. And so after about a year to a year and a half, I finally just said, okay, I may not know what I'm doing, but God, I will just trust you. And it really came down to just coming to my knees and crying and telling God, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm terrified. And God telling me, Helen, do it anyway. And so I just did. I did it anyway. And it's amazing how I came up with all of this stuff in my head, that it was going to be terrible. All this stuff was going to happen. People were going to laugh at me, or people were going to say, what is she doing? And yet it wasn't like that at all. In fact, I got a lot of people reaching out saying, thank you for doing what you're doing, or thank you for talking on that topic, or whatever it was. And I realized, how long have I been holding back when I could have been helping people? And so realizing, actually just the other day, we kind of talked about it at church, but it reminded me of this. I realized that I was making this all my mission, or what I was doing with my ministry, all about me, and in a weird way, my own self-glorification, instead of saying, this is about you. This is about the person in front of me, and whether that person doesn't care if I'm perfect. I think about like a coach I had once, and she wasn't the best dressed. She wasn't the prettiest person in the world. She wasn't this, she wasn't that. And yet I loved her just because she was real. She was kind. She'd answer my questions. And I realized that's what I was kind of holding back from. I wasn't giving who I really was and who I was meant to be in Christ because I was too scared. So that was kind of my breakthrough moment when I realized it's not about me and my perfection. It's about other people and being authentic for them.
Yes. I was just going to say that, and you already tapped into that, like that we can so often make it so much about us, even though
Absolutely.
it's tricky and deceptive, because we're like, oh, you know, some people can justify perfecting or perfectionism, thinking that it's, well, I have a high standard of excellence, when really it's, no, you're just hiding out and trying to control, like, people criticizing you, or
Right.
this is like you feeling safe, and it's very much all about you. And I got to check in with that all the time, especially whenever I'm stepping out into something new that's stressing me. Whenever God is asking me, okay, now I want you to do this and this. I wish I could say that, you know, I've gotten to the point where there's never an internal resistance or a pushback or a fight about it. I still am like, but I don't want to do that.
Right.
I'm not comfortable doing that. That's new. That requires more effort. That requires inconveniencing myself to a degree. That requires risk. And like, I got comfortable and cozy here. I call it the comfy, cozy, cute zone. And that's usually when God's like, time to go, time to move. We gotta like keep stretching and keep growing and
keep growing. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I've said this before too, it's amazing how it's very, very simple, that it's one powerful decision can truly change your life. One simple, very powerful decision. Not easy, because there's a lot of our stuff we're working through, but it's like you said it yourself. You were like, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to move. I'm going to listen to what God has asked me to do. I'm going to stop making this about me. I'm going to put my expectations down and live surrendered and yielded to His plans and purposes for me. And when we do that, it's freeing.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So what were some of the things when you finally made that decision? What were some of the things that you noticed were the biggest difference between holding on, kind of controlling outcomes, hiding out, living in fear, versus, all right, I'm going to take this decision and step in faith and truly let go? And what was that difference? Like internally, what did you feel the most?
Well, I would say just on this basic level, when I first started doing my blog, my social media, all that stuff, because I went through a situation where all of a sudden I just got a ton of followers. So it was kind of just like I got thrown into this. When I finally decided, okay, I'm going to start talking again. I'm going to start putting myself out there. When I started my blog, when I started posting again, when I started doing all that, I will say everything felt so, and I think you mentioned it before, but so forced. Everything within me felt so like almost constricting, like it was suffocating me. I hated doing it. I hated every single time that I would do something, I'd spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours just doing something that I didn't love in the first place, because it didn't really feel like me, but it was what I thought was right. This is what people want. This is what's expected. And yet I was just losing my happiness and my joy from it. And then finally, when I just decided to stop being fearful of like losing followers, or maybe not a lot of people look at this, or this letting go of this failure that like, oh, everyone's going to see me fail when no one even like knows what I define that failure. No one else knows what I think is failure, and no one else even really cares, if we're honest. And so then when I finally let go of that, I got to a point where I finally just said, okay, I'm just going to start. And even if you look at my social media and everything, you can see this very change. Like, it's like I'm doing all these very posed pictures, and then it's very much, hey, this is me today. This is what I'm doing. And then some of them are still professional photos, but it's very much, you can see it just shifting to my real life. And as soon as that happened, I felt this release and this joy again, where I felt that freedom, the happiness that now came from doing it. Like, I felt like I was actually getting into my groove of, this is what God's called me to, because I just shred all this is who I need to be. And I allowed myself to be vulnerable, and I let myself just say, this is who I am. And if you like it, I'm so glad. Let's do life together. If you don't, that's okay. God bless you, and we'll move on, and once that happened, and it just, my whole mentality inside, and that feeling of just like something was chaining me down finally released, and I was able to say, okay, now I can find joy in this, which is really what I'm supposed to be finding if God's calling me to help people.
Yes. Amen to that. I have a very similar journey, and I think, because I tend to work with a lot of women who, they tend to be entrepreneurial or mission driven. They know they are called to transform lives through their work message and leadership. So you're getting a lot of either people starting ministries or nonprofits or businesses, or they're influencers, they're author speakers, something to that degree. And there's a lot. I think the world is full of this wherever you go, honestly, but I noticed this pretty intensely in learning business and entrepreneurship. There's so many strategies. There's so many methods and things you can be doing. And for me, I got lost in all of that because I didn't know, my background is in social work, and I didn't know any of this.
Right.
So I went all in because I wanted to do this well and do it to the best of my ability. But this is where it gets tricky, because a lot of purposes can start getting hijacked by perfecting, really the ego gets in the driver's seat of like, people are like, well, I'm doing this work for the Lord. Like, I'm doing this because he called me to do it. But then it's like, I have this wake-up call of like, but this isn't, like, if I keep feeling like burned out, I'm short-tempered, I have very little left to give to anybody because I'm obsessed with all of these details and all the things, then something is wrong and something is off. And I've encountered so many women that can relate to that space of feeling like they have to learn and do it right and follow this person's roadmap. And there's nothing wrong with like learning certain skills. We have to be very, very careful when we put our faith in that.
Right.
Really, I found like God has the best answers.
Absolutely.
Like, his ways are.
Well, I think it's like we just say, oh, well, that's not in the Bible, or like he wasn't living when entrepreneurship was a huge thing, even though like everyone was basically an entrepreneur back then. You know what I mean? But I like that mentality. Like, we think that it's not, like, God can't help us with it. Instead, we have to look to all these other people and all these other things and read all these other things in order to be successful.
The more I honestly press in and study Jesus' life, the more I'm like, he was remarkable at like knowing how to build relationships and trust in people's lives and have people that knew who he was and serving people well. And I'm like, that is what business is about.
Absolutely.
It's about solving problems and transforming people's lives. It's as simple as that. We complicate it with like funnels and blah, blah, But like,
exactly.
I like, the more I really study this, like, no, honestly, your go-to master marketer is Jesus. Like, he really knows like How to Transform Lives, the guy knew how to bring a core team with him and have that core team multiply his message. He knew how to do all of this. So
Right.
the internet marketing wasn't like, sure, it's like the times and the applications, I guess, or the modalities or vehicles are a bit different, but the essence of it.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, they're timeless. There's nothing new under the sun. So.
Right. As Solomon told us.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing I say, because when I speak to, because this was a fair that I had of I'm feeling like everyone else is saying the same thing, and why should you write? This. You said that there's fears too, and it's like there's nothing new under the sun, so we can let that go. Like you're probably not going to say anything new, so that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, somebody told me that one time, and that freed me of a lot, because I was like, how am I going to think of something that's completely new and upon different? And I think I was at a women's conference, and a woman who is successful at writing and speaking and everything, she this is right when I was getting started, and she goes, well, if you're saying something that's new and completely different and no one's thought of it, she's like, you might need to check it because it may not be right. Like, if no one's thought of it, if no one's done it already, if no one's said something about it, then it might not even be real, like what you should be saying in the first place. So, and I thought about that. I was like, man, so like even she is going to say things that other people have said. She just says it in a new way. And that freed me so much to be able to say, I'm just saying it in the way that God taught me. It's the same lesson, but it's just new and different from my perspective.
Right. And that's beautiful, because I feel like you and I have a very similar message, but we use different language and different words. We have different life experiences, and like people are going to be drawn to you with your unique experience and the way you express it and share it. And they like Helen Elizabeth Peters, with your special way of presenting it. So that's what I love, is that there's so much room for all of us, and we could just take that pressure of just being, so original.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right off of us. So tell us about the book that you are writing.
So the book that I'm writing is basically my story, but basically lessons, because I didn't really want to do just a, hey, here's my story, right? So it's more so my story in bits and pieces, but then with a lot of scripture base and a lot of lessons to be learned. So it's more so, I feel like, a self-help Christian based book versus here's a crazy story. So I got the opportunity to write my story because I lost my husband, Craig Strickland, and he was my first husband, and he passed away in a hunting accident. And so that was about 3.5 years ago. But he was a country music singer, and that's kind of what caused me to get a lot of my followers and my influence, was when that all happened, because it was all over the news and all over that. So I got a book deal originally for that. And then in writing this book, I have the opportunity to write other books on other things that I want to write about. But it's been cool how at first I was really not bitter at all for that, but more so like, I don't know how to write a book that's going to teach anything. That's not just like, here's my sad story, because that's not what I wanted. But then I realized, well, like what they're really wanting is, how did you get through this difficult time? And when I look at that, there's a lot of things that had to lead and happen in order for me to get to that point. So I'm basing it a lot off of David in the Bible. And so a lot about how he had a lot of waiting periods in his life, both like even when he was a shepherd waiting, he was getting better at using a lyre, however you're supposed to say it. But then also he was getting better at like slinging stones and doing like protecting herds and leading. And he was learning all these things in that waiting period that caused him to be ready when he fought Goliath. But then past that, then he had to go to another waiting period. And so it's kind of like how you look through his life. He went through a lot of waiting periods that he learned a lot. And then something big happened and he was prepared for it because he learned during that waiting period. So I'm kind of talking about waiting periods and how we can look at waiting periods in this new positive way, where we can grow in Christ and we can become ready when those big pivotal moments happen, versus just thinking my life is boring because I'm in all these waiting periods and I don't know what's happening. And because those big pivotal moments will happen, but God's got to know that we're prepared, that we're preparing ourselves before he can let us get to that point. So that's kind of what my book is about how we can work through waiting periods and grow and strengthen for the pivotal moments, both good and bad. But when things happen in life that really alter things, we can prepare that way.
That sounds good. Can't wait to read it.
I'm excited. We're excited to release it.
Yeah. Do you know when the release date is?
No, so we're doing final edits, so I'm excited about that, but then I don't know it kind of depends on when I want to release that, when we think would be the best time. I don't know if I want to do it right at the beginning of fall, if I want to do it closer to Thanksgiving. I'm thinking more so closer to Thanksgiving, because that would have been around our anniversary, and it also would have been around the time that Craig passed away, which was during Christmas. So that would have been, I think, kind of leaning towards that time period, because I think that will be a little bit more like a celebration of his life.
Okay. And did you say the title?
I didn't. We're defining that right now, but
okay,
I think we're finalizing though. I think it's going to be Facing Goliath, because the storm you passed away in was Winter Storm Goliath. And so it just kind of happened how all of that kind of came together. And I feel like that's too much of a coincidence that I'm wanting to use David's life, and then the storm was called Winter Storm Goliath. That I think that's what we're going to face. We're going to kind of fall on, and then talk about growing in the waiting period. Like then the subtitle will be something like growing in the waiting periods, so you can embrace God's plan, or just something along those. That's kind of where we don't really know. Is that what are we saying? The little letters underneath.
Okay, perfect. So it's still in the works, but how can people connect with you? Because they're probably going to be like, I'm going to want that book.
Yes, absolutely. Well, social media is great. So I'm Helen Elizabeth Speaks on all social media. Helen Elizabeth Speaks. And then you can also go to my blog, which is helenelizabethspeaks.com. And then I have a podcast, which is Your Best New Self with Helen Elizabeth. So any of those forms would be great.
Good. And all of those will be in the description box below. So be sure to connect with that. And I'm looking forward to that book. So before we leave, I want to know who your favorite Bible character is.
Oh, there's so many good ones. Well, right now I really like David, just because I've been studying his life. But I really like Joseph a lot in the Old Testament. I like Joseph because he went through so much, and yet instead of being bitter and angry, he was able to just continue. I mean, he got sold by his brothers. He got put in jail whenever he shouldn't have been. He was blamed for rape when he didn't do anything wrong. He was all this stuff, and yet God. He's another person that's a waiting period person. Where he has to sit there and he's waiting, thinking, God, how are you ever going to use this? Why are you doing this to me? But he could have said that, but he doesn't. Instead, he's faithful. Because he's faithful, he pushes forward, and God uses him in such a miraculous way to be able to save his family. And so I think that I love anybody who has to do a waiting period that seems crazy, that you seem very alone in, and yet they work through it and they trust God. And in the end, God shows them something miraculous. So I think probably those two. I love that with Mary as well, Jesus's mother, just because think about the waiting period she was in, 9 months of just being, people just talking bad about her. Her whole life I felt like was just like ups and downs and having to deal with so many things. So I don't know. I guess any character that's doing those, but those are probably my top three.
Yeah, similar for me. So what is one, and not to put you on the spot here, but what is one piece of advice that you have for those that are waiting right now for God to move in their life or fulfill promises they believe he spoke over them, or for them to see purposes unfold and truly manifest in their life? What is one piece of advice you have for them?
Oh, that's simple for me. You have to love God more than anything else in your life. Love him with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. And so that's Mark 12:30, I believe. And that to me sounds so simple. It sounds like the easiest thing in the world, but because when you say as a Christian, do you love God? Well, then, well, yeah, of course. But that really means if his plan's different than yours, will you still love him? If he takes things away that you don't want him to take away, will you still love him? If things went wrong and you don't get what you want, will you still love him? And when you can truly say and you know inside whether or not you're being honest, yes, I will choose to love you more than anything else in this world. When you decide to live that way, then in these waiting periods, you're no longer bitter because you're in a waiting period. You're saying, okay, God, how can you use me in this moment? How do I need to grow in this moment? What do I need to do? Because your whole mindset's changed. Because you're not focusing on yourself anymore and what you desire and your expectations. You're focusing on him and what he desires for you. So you're saying, okay, I'm in a waiting period. What do I need to learn? Versus I'm in a waiting period. God, when are you going to change things? So I would say that was probably my biggest piece of advice.
Love it. It's all about where your heart is with
Absolutely.
and leaning.
And I think that changes on like everything, right? That's like you're going to be more successful in all aspects of your life if it's truly based on, God, if you need me here, I'm going to do the best I can for you, versus, oh, I don't really feel like doing this because I don't feel like being here right now. You know?
And that's really where I believe you truly learn to be content in all things. His grace
Absolutely.
for you, and you chose it to surrender to his grace and his plan. And it really is so. It is an abundant, free life, whether you live in physical, lots of money and things, or nothing at all. There's such an internal freedom that I think all human beings long for and want. And that is the key. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Helen, for taking the time to get on and share your story. And
absolutely.
Be sure to check out her podcast and check her out what she's doing, because we all need the reminders and uplifting Bible stories and teachings to anchor us in truth when we are going through some trials and challenges and having to persevere and wait and trust. And Helen is a wonderful, wonderful resource to tap into.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to watch this and get to connect with everybody. So thank you.
Thanks.
So that was Helen Elizabeth Peters. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Be sure to check her out on all of her social media platforms in the description below. And she is doing a 21-day challenge beginning in the first week of August. I will be doing one with her on Nehemiah and the process of the messy middle and perseverance. So be sure to check that out, scope her out. I'll talk to you guys next time.